All right, so I realized that I didn't actually introduce myself when I started this morning, which is classic. Sorry about that. I'm Jocelyn Poirier. I'm the manager of rugby development. So I'm the name on so many of the emails that you get, probably. I'm the face behind a lot of the club development that you see. And I just wanted to chat before we get into Liz's session. For those of you who maybe weren't part of the Rugby Development Consultant Network this past year, or you were a part of it, but you weren't as engaged in it, we're going to chat a little bit about how this past year went and what we're looking at for next year, what we've kind of learned and how we're evolving it. So before I get too much into it, I just wanted to come back to our future vision. And this is what we sort of shared last year when we were starting the Rugby Development Consultant Network. This was why we put these RDC roles in place, right? This is what we're long-term working towards and all the different initiatives that we work on. And Rob and John and I have many a conversation about this sort of piece, is looking at how can we make all of these pieces come together. And it overlaps with what Charlotte's doing in competitions, it overlaps with events and member services, but ultimately we're trying to make clubs, volunteers' lives as easy as possible while still having as many as possible, as long as possible, the best environment possible. So just to give you kind of a snapshot of what we are looking at and where we're coming from this. So the next piece is the RDC scope from 2025 season. And I would say we were ambitious with this and probably a bit not as prescriptive maybe as we should have been, but we touched on most of these things. The two I've highlighted here, volunteer management, project coordination, I think that's where capacity-wise, we didn't quite get to it as much, both from the actual time and investment that the RDCs had to give and the collaboration, cooperation, engagement that they needed from clubs to be able to do those things, because that's not something that the RDC can come in and do for you as a part-time consultant. They needed to be working with the clubs, and if that wasn't something clubs are already doing or that they were able to really involve the RDC in, they weren't necessarily able to be used for those areas specifically. Go ahead to the next slide. And I'll look sort of our successes and challenges, I think, from this year when we look back, and each of our RDCs kind of submitted their own final report, and it was a little bit different in each of the regions, which I'll touch on. But overall, I'd say one of the main successes really was the resources that came out of it. So if you were involved and you were talking with your club, and even if you weren't as much, they were probably sending you resources, and they were working on creating resources based on the information that we have about the clubs and conversations they were having to try and be developing what you need most, right? We want to really be working on what is going to be most helpful for you. So they had those conversations, said, you know what, I think this would be really great. I think this would really help clubs. So lots of new resources came out of that. The direct support for club priorities. So again, clubs who were really engaged, they got direct support for their specific needs as opposed to us providing sort of a generic support for everybody. It was able to be tailored to the different club needs. Improved connections and partnerships. So some areas and some clubs took more advantage of this than others, or it made more sense for their context. But we did have some really unique connections come out of this, some interesting partnerships or formalization of partnerships that maybe technically existed before, but we weren't making the most use of those. So that was a big one. Some unique programming and recruitment efforts, again, just sort of new ideas and help to get some things off the ground or amplify them. Improved communication with clubs. This one, again, I think it always depends. Do you read your emails? Doesn't matter how many emails you get if you don't read them. But in general, I would say the clubs that were involved in the RDC network, especially those that were well engaged in it, we knew more about what they were doing. I think they knew more about what we were doing, and we were able to support better. And then just identifying club challenges and possible solutions, and this will help us move forward as well. In terms of challenges, as I said, the clubs that really didn't have the capacity or the ability to engage with the RDCs, it was hard for them to help. And they sort of did their best to meet what we thought were your needs or what you'd identified initially as your needs, but there's only so much that they can do if they're completely separate and they're not actually having that two-way communication with the club. In some cases, there was some misunderstanding of the RDC scope. So expecting more boots on the grounds or wanting, more from an RDC than they really could actually provide. The seasonality, I think, plays into both of those things somewhat. So because we started in February to give us time to get them actually hired and onboarded, they were just getting ready and they'd had some conversations and they're really ready to hit the ground running, and we're ramping up into in season for clubs, and our volunteers are totally at max capacity, right? And at the risk of burning out from doing too much more. And then we got to the end of the season and we know that's a tough time too. And they've just finished at the end of November. So we'll talk about our change for that. And then collaboration is just not anyone not trying to be collaborative for the in that sense necessarily, but because of the nature of the RDC role and the way we'd set them up regionally, they didn't really have the ability to fully be a well-connected network and work together. You know, they weren't working in the same room, they were working in different hours sometimes. So while we did have regular connections, I would say that that was a bit of a missed piece, that we really wanted there to be more of a full network support. And I don't think we fully actualized that. So next year, what our goals are, one is to remove that general club buy-in. So in 2025, in order to provide the support that we wanted to, we asked clubs to invest based on their size, right? What ended up happening is that regardless of how much or little they invested, it had nothing to do with whether the club was able to engage. And so some clubs, you know, invested a lot and maybe didn't get that much out of it, and others invested a little and got lots out of it. And we didn't want people to feel like, oh, well, I don't know if we'll be able to use them, so we're not going to invest. We didn't want to have to rely on clubs paying extra either. So we've got a new model that will not cost the clubs for general support, but it'll allow you to use the RDCs at sort of a preferred consultant rate for specific projects. So if you say, you know what, we actually do have the capacity and we want to do this now, we're going to be intentional about putting our energy towards this, you can work with an RDC and they'll help you with that project with some clearly defined outcomes and time commitments from each of you. Focus on key areas. So again, instead of sort of saying like, we'll help you with whatever you want within this broad scope, we've narrowed it down a little bit more, and we're looking at sort of expert RDCs on a few specific topics. So strategic planning and governance is a huge one that's come up, and as our RDCs were embedded in the clubs, we really realized a lot of clubs are struggling in that area. The other one is project planning and management, and then sort of funding and partnerships embedded across all of that. We're really being organized and with that volunteer management and efficient with our projects so that we can get funding for projects, follow through with projects, help ease volunteer burden. And then the last piece that, even though, as I said, I think communication's improved across the board, across our entire organization, Rugby Canada, any other sport organization, we've got some volleyball in the house, communications. We know communications is a huge piece, and I know that's a challenge for clubs too in terms of dealing with athletes and parents. So we're trying to invest in improving knowledge translation, improving accessibility of information, and really like storytelling. So sharing more of what the clubs are doing and get that sort of human aspect of it. So to go into a bit more of the nitty gritty of what we're doing with 2026 RDCs, we've got these priority area experts, and Liz will be one of them. So you get a little sneak peek of that. That's what our next session is here. They'll be contracted in the off season only. So we're not going to use them through the busy summer season. They'll work during the off season when you should be doing that club development, right? And we hopefully have a bit more capacity for it. They'll run some workshops, they'll provide resources, they'll have office hours maybe that you can attend. They'll work with the RO staff, right, to make sure that we're aligned and connected. And then they'll be available, as I said, for that club specific consulting. And then the other side is we're going to bring in a development communications role. Okay, so communication specific development team member to help translate what is in my brain and Rob's brain, the work that we're doing, and John, and make sure that all of that is easily accessible, is well communicated, is clear. They will be looking at part-time during the school year and then full-time during the summer. Yeah, go to the next one. The last piece I want to leave you with before I turn it over to Liz is just a bit of this context in terms of the bigger development picture and what we're looking at. So this comes straight from what we just actually presented at our Rugby Canada PSO meeting recently, sharing with all the provinces about what everyone's looking at, what we're working on. So we've got the club development piece, which is all of this stuff, the RDCs. Got communications, I mentioned, is going to be a huge piece for us, including some tech integration that we're looking at. And part of that is Play HQ and LMS, but how else can we use tech to help improve our efficiency and ease the burden on everyone? We got some research partnerships going on. So you've heard from Carl before, you're going to hear from him again. That York U partnership, we've got partnership with Brock University and some of the work they're doing with U14s. You're going to see about it coming out soon, probably, but Carl's working on recruiting an RO specific grad student. So if you're listening or you're here and you know anyone who's maybe interested in the sport for development kind of space, or anything that Carl's doing kind of piques your interest, you might like to go and actually do grad work with Carl and specifically work on what we're working on and help us, we're looking for that. T1 growth. So you'll be seeing more of that from Rugby Canada from us. There's a job posted recently that's around sort of the corporate roles or corporate leagues that we're looking at. T1 programming. We're expanding our all-in rugby cup to be 11 plus to fill that non-contact side pathway, right from, you finish U10, you want to continue playing non-contact, there's mixed ability T1 that is 11 plus. And then just in general with T1, a bit of a girls and women focus, and game leaders, which we're not really talking about today, but chat with Rob, connect with any of us afterwards. There's lots coming on that side too. Competitions, I won't get into too much, but again, we had a big restructure last year, so really trying to fine tune the nitty gritty and make that easier. So Leanne, your comment earlier, right? Like we know that change has been tough and there's a lot to navigate. Play HQ will hopefully help us with that, but we're trying to get a lot of these resources clearer for you, both from, Game On and how does that work? What do we do with that? Game regs, making sure that we know law variations. We've got a continued U14 pilot looking at development there, and then we're working on a core competency pathway to kind of say all the way through from, your U4 right up to masters, what are the core skills that they need to have. So kind of coming back to Jack's conversation or presentation earlier this morning, right, of what are those fundamentals at each group, what's most important, how do you act as a coach, as a club manager at each of those levels, what should a session look like, that kind of piece. And then technical game leads, which plays into the game leader piece, but Rob's working on developing some curriculum for those. And I think it was Mike earlier talking about, could we have a coach of match officials, coach of coaches at the club? That's what these technical game leaders will do basically, is they'll identify and train young, new game leaders, which will be kind of a combination of like a rookie rugby sort of new intro coach role and a pre-match official game manager sort of introduction as well. So looking to support that minor, little bit of the youth, and then T1 as well as it comes in. And with that, if anyone has any questions quickly for me, I'm happy to take them, but then we'll hand it over to Liz and you get into some of the good work. Yeah, James.
It was a bit late, but so sorry if are there any subject matter experts or on community consultants involved?
The rugby development consultant?
To do with groundsmanship, field management, maintenance, or like vision?
That's a great question. It's not one of our focus areas here. But I know facilities was actually something that one of our RDCs in particular, Jess in Toronto, a lot of the Toronto clubs had identified that like needing facility space as a big need. And so that was something that she helped work with them on identifying new venues and that kind of piece. But yeah, I would say, and Liz, you can speak to this as well, but I would say part of that actually comes into sort of the strat planning and identifying what is important, what's missing at your club, and what are we doing about that. But yeah, great question.